Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So to kick things off, we've been teasing this special guest, but to summon them, there's a particular phrase which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So let's go with computer, activate the emergency medical hologram.
Please state the nature of the electoral emergency, Commander.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. So our electorate has lost trust in elections. Organizations have been casting aspersions as to their value and efficacy. We want to get more people voting safely and transparently. What can we do to further this?
That's a great question.
Tough one, isn't it?
That's why I'm here, because I'm here to learn as well. I am your ideal audience member because I want to hear the questions asked, and most importantly, I want our three expert panelists to answer them so we can all take action.
Perfect. So let's actually introduce some folks to get this going. But first, some thank yous. First, thanks to our guests, Tim, Bob. Our panelists are Emily, Lynn, and Bennie, and to all the viewers who are here with us. So we're looking to have a lively discussion on election transparency and integrity. We want to improve trust in our elections and democracy itself. We all find ourselves wondering if our votes matter, if our voice is any say in government, and if we can even trust the institutions themselves. So I hope that by the end of this, we're able to allay some fears. And if you're still worried, well, let's hope that we can get you more involved in the process for the future too. We'll be focusing on the real world and real problems for the majority of the Zoom, but hold on till the end. There's a dose of Star Trek discussion with our esteemed guests. So I'm your moderator, Renzo, from the Beyond Trek podcast. My interests are warp field dynamics, the value of Romanian deadlifts versus regular deadlifts, and finding new ways to spoil my pup Tukes. We've got the talented Tim Russ, whose credits involve Star Trek Voyager itself. He's also was in iCarly, Spaceballs, and The Orville. Tim has also directed and produced various TV and movie projects. Tim is also an amateur astronomer, successful musician, and enthusiastic supporter of democracy. Our surprise guest is the inimitable Robert Picardo. His acting credits include the Stargate franchise, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Grey's Anatomy, and of course Voyager itself. Bob is also a published author, TV director, and gifted musical performer. In his free time, he's also a celebrated hotel room chef, creating near gourmet foods on the go. Our three expert panelists, we'll start with Emily Levy. She's the founder and director of Scrutineers.org. Emily has been a leader in the election transparency movement since 2004, when she coordinated a precinct-level statistical forensic investigation into the presidential election in Ohio. As leader of the Scrutineers, she specializes in helping members of the public understand election technology and security issues, and to become active in working to secure and make our elections more transparent. Lynn Bernstein is a former aerospace engineer. Her experience integrating testing complex systems and instruments on numerous satellites taught her to think critically about processes, procedures, and accountability. She now uses many of those same skills to help improve North Carolina's election systems with her organization, Transparent Elections NC. And then we've got Bennie Smith, who is the secretary of Shelby County, Tennessee Election Commission. He is known for his predictive analytics research and the proprietary method to forecast turnout. Smith's research has been presented to election officials, elected officials, and at security panels around the country. So we've got a great body of knowledge here that hopefully can engage in this discussion interestingly. I'm going to briefly pass the mic, proverbially, to Tay for a word on our sponsors and partners.
Hi, my name is Tay Phoenix, and I am the founder. And when I say founder, I do not mean that kind of Trek the Vote. We are a nonpartisan grassroots network of Star Trek fans, actors, and behind-the-scenes professionals, a group of Starfleet officers, if you will, who are sworn to uphold, defend, and advance the cause of democracy. We do that in a couple of ways, with events like this, with our partner Scrutineers, and also through volunteerism with a whole big group of partners. We work with organizations that perform vital functions during the elections process, everything from phone banking to poll watching to this kind of election transparency work that we're here to talk about today. So first and foremost, we hope you will all sign up to volunteer with our partner Scrutineers, who is very kindly hosting this event with us today. If you're interested in additional volunteer opportunities, or if this isn't quite the right fit for you, visit trekthevote.com and fill out your form. Or fill out our form rather. We'll analyze your answers and help you find the right Starfleet mission for you. And please tell your friends, post about this in your fan groups, get the word out as far and wide as you can. Because democracy is humanity's future, and who better to bring that about than us? And finally, I just want to thank the wonderful people from the Beyond Trek podcast. We appreciate you so much. We could not do this without you.
Happy to help wherever we can. All right, so let's start off with the questions. And here's a fun one. So, Lynn, you worked in the aerospace industry. You're probably the person here who's most directly contributing to something like living in Star Trek, right? Will you tell us what you did and how that has influenced your current work?
Yeah, sure. So before I founded Transparent Elections, like you said, my career was largely focused on the space industry. Growing up, I lived about 10 miles from NASA in Houston, and I wanted to be a pilot and astronaut more than anything in the world. I never thought I would be doing anything related to something that wasn't just about exploring the skies. And so, it's really great that these two things are sort of merging right now, where we're getting people who are involved and interested in space and Star Trek, and we're getting them involved in elections. Some of the things that I worked on a Solstice and Deep Impact, but most of my career was spent working testing and integrating CloudSat. Some of the jobs that this job involved training the Air Force how to boot up the spacecraft and deploy the solar arrays after launch. And as exciting as that sounds, and it was a lot of fun, it involved years of work, writing test documentation, essentially integration plans, test plans, years of writing those, and then several months in a clean room, actually, doing that work of connecting one wire at a time, one subsystem at a time. And so I'm sort of a self-professed process nerd, and that's kind of how I approach elections. I really do think that the processes and procedures are really important so that we can make sure that we have accountability and that we can continue to make our elections more and more trustworthy every election cycle.
Cool. Yeah, no, it seems like it's a background that makes sense to be involved in this. Processes and procedures are what keep elections predictable in the sense that things work the way that they're expected to. So that's a good background for us to have here. So here's a question for the three panelists. When it comes to election transparency and security, how would you describe the general broad strokes of the problems with those elections for us? And Emily, if you'd go first, that'd be great.
Thanks for the question. So there are a number of problems, and I will take a couple of them and then let my co-panelists add to that. One of the things that we like to highlight is that there's a huge vulnerability in that we have virtually all the votes in this country now counted by computers, and that's true no matter what method people use for voting. Ideally, people who are able to hand mark paper ballots and cast those ballots. That's the most secure system. But even those ballots are counted by computers, which have the same vulnerability as any other computers related to their software, the potential for hacking and rigging, etc. And if we are going to continue to use computers to count our votes, we really need to have much more stringent checks and balances. Right now, there are some states do audits to check the vote counts, but no state really does a rigorous enough audit. And there aren't really audits of the other procedures besides checking the counts themselves. So those are a couple of issues. And basically, the public is kept in the dark. We are not able to see what goes on inside our elections, and that gives rise to all sorts of questions about who actually won.
Bennie, if you could go next.
Yes, I would go a little bit deeper and say that chain of custody is a term that is legal in all states and all jurisdictions. The following of the chain of custody is how you button up some of these parts of the processes. What you have is these two P's that are fighting with each other. You have public dollars paying for proprietary software, and that creates this conundrum where when the public is asking to see what it paid for, they're being told that it's proprietary and they can't see it. So even though the computers are conducting the elections, the handover from the paper ballot process to the tabulation still goes through this process, and it's called chain of custody. So the lack of transparency, these outdated processes, they get exposed when you see the breakdown in the chain of custody.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. And Lynn, what do you think is the biggest one?
Yeah, so I see the issue really as being sort of, there's this pull between transparency and security, and these are not mutually exclusive. Every election creates a lot of evidence, and when I say evidence, I don't mean evidence of fraud. Evidence can be exculpatory. So we really want people participating and observing this process and participating in the sense of gathering that evidence so that we can both assure the public when things are working correctly, and that we can help to correct issues moving forward that we're finding. And so, when Emily is saying we're left largely in the dark, that's really true. We've been trying to gather election evidence for a long time. And there's sort of a field right now called evidence-based elections, and it's something that I'm really a proponent of. And sort of the premise of evidence-based elections is that elections officials, their job is to find the correct winners and losers of the election. But more importantly, their job is to provide convincing evidence to the public that they did find that, because I think we all understand what happens when people don't have confidence in elections.
No, that's a very good point, especially the fact that security and transparency are not mutually exclusive, right? And that actually leads me to the next question, which is based on something that I read through the Brennan Center for Justice, which does research on election integrity. So they argue that the United States doesn't really have one election. We have 3,143 different elections that run across the county level across the country at the same time, right? Because there are so many different systems and checks in place at every level. They argue that the decentralized nature protects us inherently from large-scale voting irregularities. Is this something that you guys generally agree with, or what do you take issue with that stance?
Who is that directed?
Yeah, Lynn. Let's start with Lynn.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do think that decentralized elections do protect us somewhat from some threat vectors, like, for instance, foreign governments who maybe don't understand which software versions each system is running. However, I do think that the decentralization doesn't really protect against insider fraud or insider, just little things that go wrong with electronics in elections. And so, yes, in some cases it does protect, but it doesn't protect for all threat vectors.
That's a very good point. Emily, could you, anything to add?
Just a little bit. Was that 3,143, was that the number of counties in the country?
Yeah.
So the New England states, Wisconsin and Michigan, I believe, all run their elections at the local level, at the town or county level. So there's even more jurisdictions than that for elections. And then on the other side of kind of that spectrum, we have states like Georgia that has the same voting system for the whole state. So there, as with everything here, the answer is kind of, it depends, but I absolutely agree with what Lynn said, though.
Good. And Bennie?
Yeah, I would say it's an oversimplification. There are more than 6,000 jurisdictions, and I would leave everybody a tip from a guy named O'Neill, and that is that all politics is local. And when you consider these races are being decided, not necessarily at the national level every time, there are hundreds. I personally had this as the Secretary of the Election Commission. I had to sign over 90 certificates in the last election here, and none of those were national elections. And when you consider money and power and the incentive to remain in power, there is a lot more to be desired at the local level, and you just have to consider that.
No, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? If there are more than 6,000 different ways of handling elections, right? Trying to standardize things does offer us more transparency, and it can offer us more security, especially against the kinds of threats that Lynn mentioned. So, Bennie, with regards to like the use of electronic voting systems, are there any like standout examples of machines being particularly secure, particular companies that you think do it better than the rest, ones that we can like laud versus others that we can kind of defame or think of as being inferior?
I'm gonna put a pin and finish the last piece, because you brought up something I think it was very significant. You don't have to affect a national election using all of the counties. You need about 6 or 7. So even though it could be decentralized, you only have to target a certain number of counties. Most of the if you look at polling, most of the counties, they trend and do the same thing. So it's these swing areas that really open up the vulnerabilities. All of the election, the big three, there's ES&S, there's Hart Intercivic, and there's Dominion. Contrary to what many election integrity activists talk about, these systems have very good, robust auditing features inside of them. The problem is that they are configurable. So they're giving you something off the shelf that has the capacity and the capability to make sure everything is documented, but it's configurable at the local level. And many of these counties, they I would always say that county officials, they probably 99% of them are the most trying to do their job right, but they're not technical people. Elections cross into so many other professions, and they're usually either having some contractors or some jobbers to handle this part of the election, and that's what increases the vulnerability, because that is being handled in the hands of.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially since if all three of the major vendors have at least a pretty robust level, that gives us, on average, a pretty good stake in security there. So I'm going to take a question from the audience on this one, because I think it's actually a really good question. And I'm going to target this one at Emily and at Tay, actually. So the question starts with, it isn't too late to do something a mere month before the election. Bob, you'd mentioned that we're only 4 weeks out, right? Do you think it's too late to do things too?
Do I think it's too late? Absolutely not. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. I think that let's put it this way: as actors, rehearsal is everything, and as we get closer and closer to opening night, which of course is election day, the work and the specificity and the attack in your performance increases to meet the big day. So this is exactly the time when we need to get volunteers, which I think Tay is going to talk about in just a moment, that are tailored, volunteer positions that are tailored to your particular community and your situation and your skills. So that's, I think, what we should be talking about now. The question is, exactly because we're so close, what exactly should we do at this point?
Cool. So Emily, tell us some things that we can do at this point.
I love it, Bob, that you mentioned not only your location, but also your skills, because no matter what people's skills are, there tends to be a way to apply them to this problem and to help fill needs that organizations have related to protecting the election. So there are different things that people can do before, during, and after the voting happens. And we talk about election day, but I just want to remind folks that in most places there's early voting. So voting is I don't know if it started anywhere yet, but it's starting very soon around the country. So leading up to elections, one of the most important things that people can do is reach out to voters. There are organizations that do phone banking, text banking, letter and postcard writing to voters that actually makes a huge difference in how many people show up to vote. And I don't know if Tay, if you have any statistics about the difference that it makes, but that's not work that Scrutineers does, but we can help put you in touch with organizations that do that work. I appreciate being cheered on by someone's dog in the background there. So that's one of the important things before elections. And then another thing to be doing before elections is to be preparing for what you can do during and after elections. So if anyone here has ever considered becoming a poll worker, now would be a great time to contact your local election office and see if they still need poll workers and apply for that position. It's a minimally paid position in most places. Really, really important. And last I heard there, and Tay, you can speak to this because we're both partnering with Power the Polls, that's recruiting poll workers around the country. And then starting on election night after the polls close, I'm wondering how much detail do you want me to get into now? We're kind of early in the program. Do you want me to save more specifics for later, or jump in now about specific roles people can play?
Well, I see no downside to having to repeat ourselves on some of these things, right? Like,
Okay,
we want people to get involved, so.
I'll talk about two other specific things. One is on election night, after the polls close, in most places around the country, the poll workers are required to print out what's called a poll tape from the scanners that count votes at the polling place. That the poll tape looks like a cash register tape, and it has on it the precinct numbers and also the vote totals for every candidate that was on the ballot, the vote totals that they got just from that were counted by that scanner. They need to print out this poll tape and hang it where it's publicly viewable outside the polling place. So what we and a number of other organizations are doing is encouraging people to go take video of those poll tapes using an app developed by one of our partner organizations, Democracy Counts, so that we can, like Lynn said, capture the evidence of how people actually voted. Then those numbers are compared later to the official vote totals to make sure that they haven't changed. And Bennie has a great story about what he discovered one time doing this work, but that's something that's pretty simple for people to do. All you need to do is find out where the polling places are in your area and have a smartphone, download the app and go do it. And we're going to be having a training coming up about that in a couple of weeks that I can mention later. And then after the election, in the days and weeks that follow, we are encouraging people to observe the processing and counting of votes to make sure that the procedures are followed and that corners aren't cut, and to support the hardworking election officials who are really under a lot of pressure this year and have been harassed so much. Tay, you want to add to that?
I mean, I think you've covered it brilliantly. I just want to say there are a couple of other opportunities. So yes, first of all, phone banking, it does increase turnout. Some experts, there's pretty conclusive research that says that it does. The percentages vary from sample to sample. I've seen things like 5% or 3%, but it does absolutely increase your overall turnout. What's really important with the kind of voter outreach that some of our partners, for example, Fair Count, are doing, and Center for Common Ground as well, is outreach to groups of people that have often historically been targeted for voter suppression, and making sure that people know their rights, that they know the when, where, and how of voting, and that they're prepared to advocate for themselves if something goes sideways or somebody tries to take that vote away from them. So that's super, super important. Obviously, becoming a poll worker is one of the best things you can do. You know, we have this massive shortage of people. Like, there's a labor shortage across the board, right? But there's, in particular, folks who historically have been poll workers have been older. Older folks are more concerned about getting COVID reasonably. And so that's led to a drop off in poll workers. And so having people who are healthier, who are less at risk, coming in to take up that slack is important. And then of course there's the work that Scrutineers is doing, which is taking place, largely after the election, or in large part. There's a lot to be done after polls close, as Emily was saying, and that's really important too. And so it actually, what's nice is if you volunteer with one of our other partners before, and then you jump in as volunteering with Scrutineers after, like, that's a really nice way to support the election on multiple fronts, which is part of why we kind of pulled all these things together, because we want to be a place where Star Trek fans can find all of these different opportunities in places.
Lynn is also
really fair. Did I answer the question?
Lynn is also really involved in this poll tapes work that happens on election night. Lynn, do you want to add anything to that, to what I said about it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that people need to understand is that each state has different laws and regulations. So like in Emily's jurisdiction, they're required to post this poll tape. In North Carolina, they're not required to post the poll tape. And so, one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to work with elections officials to ask them to post this poll tape, but they don't want anyone taking photographs inside the election enclosure, but they also frown upon them leaving anything, even a poll tape, that could be considered litter or something, leave that behind. And so, one of the things I would recommend people do is to go to their Board of Elections website and find out when there are meetings, because right now we can already start viewing the zero portion of the poll tape when they're processing absentee ballots, which North Carolina, we've already started opening and scanning our absentee ballots in North Carolina. And so for the poll tape project, it's something that, you know, you really have to know based on your area what you're allowed to do and what the poll workers are allowed, you know, are they allowed to let you in? In some places they're not allowed to let you in. And so it's very state specific. I can tell you in North Carolina, one of the issues that we're having this year with our poll tape project is that the states has been talking to counties and telling them to not show the poll tape, only to read off the results. And so we're trying to contact them to let them know that that is really discriminatory against the hearing impaired. And it also has the potential to create chaos, which is something that this poll tape project is really meant. One of the things that it's meant to do is prevent people who are trying to, you know, inject chaos or sabotage into our elections. When people go and they image these poll tapes, they're getting pretty much the first results, the unofficial results. And sometimes, like Emily said, those results don't always get to the Board of Elections and don't always match, like Bennie had found. And one of the reasons for that is that, you know, electronics sometimes are buggy, sometimes they have glitches. And so it's just one other way to both ensure that the results are getting reported correctly, but it's also a way for people to ensure that lies aren't going to be spread about those results.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, improving the transparency by having that poll tape makes sense, because then not only can you compare the final results to that early unofficial result, it gives you like an earlier estimate as well, which lets you clear things up early as well, which that makes perfect sense. I'm going to go to another question from the audience, because I think this is a very interesting one. It's coming from a Chris Grace. They say that they're an election manager for the first time, and they're in the rural South Carolina. They're in a majority red state, and it's a very red county. In training, a question came up about what to do if somebody wears a Trump or a MAGA shirt inside of the polling booth, right? The law there says that there's nothing they can do because Trump is not a candidate in the 2022 election. Is this something that could be cause for bias or cause for problems with the integrity of something like an election? And I think I'll pose this one to Bennie first.
No, our statutes here that they say that you can't have anything that is about an issue or a topic that's on the ballot. So I would say no. Mickey Mouse is probably the most common write-in of all elections, even though that's not an issue on the ballot. That actually makes it into the voting booth. It does communicate partisanship, but what I'm told as an election official, even doesn't go this way, is that I'm a political partisan professional, in that order. So professional is usually the last piece of the harem that gets executed. I really don't see it. And I like to give a shout out to with the poll tape example. I'm sure there'll be space in the story in this webinar. But we have our district attorney of Shelby County, Steve Mulroy. He's a professor, and he joined the call, and he's an absolute Trekkie fan. I owe him like a date at my house where we're supposed to watch this. But when he was running for district attorney here, we have by law, we're supposed to post those poll tapes, and we did not. And he went right to the media and he called it out. It made it all the way up to the state level. It was absolutely something that was necessary. It is considered prima facie evidence for us here. So it is more evidentiary than the tabulated returns. And he absolutely hit it. And I would also note that when he took his oath of office, he did this when he took his oath. So shout out to Steve Mulroy, who's on the call.
Awesome. Love to see that our election officials and our elected officials are also Trekkies. Hopefully that gives them this optimistic worldview that we all really want to strive for. So quick question for you, Bennie. Can you break down prima facie in this case? Like, maybe not everybody in the audience gets exactly what that means.
the poll tape is printed. It's basically a cash register receipt. It's the closest thing to what was tabulated because it was the machine that everyone voted on. So if you imagine that this is a machine and you type in it for 400 times and then it spits out a receipt, there is no way that something that you do 10 miles away is going to have anything more evidentiary than what was there. So I would liken it to saying, there's a saying that if you whisper something in one person's ear, by the time it makes it to the 10th person, you'll have a completely different thing than what was whispered at the first time. So this is that first whisper, if you will, that poll
Gotcha.
tape.
Cool.
That's what makes a poll tape so significant.
I have a question. Is there an equivalent in mail-in balloting to the poll tape for in-person balloting?
Yeah, the equivalent to the mail-in ballot for most the updated equipment is ballot image. So whenever the ballots are scanned, they take a selfie. They, contrary to what people think, the computers are not counting the paper ballots. They're actually counting the images that are created. And there are a number of projects. Audit USA is one of these, the pioneers for the ballot images. There's a ballot image project, and that creates another record that, and I guess we'll have time to break this down. And don't get me, Emily. They create these cast vote records, which is really a record entry of what was copied from the image when the ballot was created. And these records all talk to each other. They create a chain of what the event was when the ballot was first passed through the counter after it was open for mail. I hope that answers it.
But is anything posted from that publicly in the same way that there's a moment in time at the end of the election where they post a poll tape in the in-person voting location? Is there an equivalent in mail-in votes where anything is posted that is public information?
There would not be anything posted.
Well, there is in North Carolina, right? I mean, we image the absentee ballots on high-speed scanners, and so there is a
poll tape, though.
Right, it's a poll report.
Yeah,
very similar.
Okay,
it's printed right after. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that's basically a tabulation at that point. It's that would be the equivalent of the poll tape, whereas the poll tape would then have another report that looks like exactly like this one, but there's a step in between.
And that's viewable by the public if the public can go and see that, or is that something that is not completely transparent until the final reporting?
It depends on what county you're in.
So, Tim, you've got a background, at least as far as the Trekkies are concerned, of being somebody who offers security and protection for, the crew as necessary, right? One of the things that we're all wondering as viewers for this sort of thing is, as far as securing election sites, right? I know that you are not Tuvok, right? But are there any sort of thoughts that you would have as well, and we can pass this to our panelists afterwards, about improving the security or the safety of election sites?
Well, I mean, that would be a question for somebody who's probably in law enforcement, because I know that there are supposed to be laws nationwide and or locally that prevent people from harassing voters as they come, or threatening voters as they come to the polls to vote. It's a very important aspect of voting to not intimidate or threaten. I believe those laws are pretty widespread. I don't know if there's a federal law in the books about that, or if it's just something that goes from state to state. I know that some places they are looking out to try to keep people from being intimidated by others at the polls. I mean, that's really one of the things as far as in-person voting that could affect possibly some people's desire to vote and to go to the polls at all. Do they want to put up with that kind of stuff when they're there? So I think that comes down to local law enforcement in those counties or cities and areas where the polls are set up to ensure that does not happen. And the 800-pound gorilla in the room is really not so much. I think the technical aspects could easily be worked out with our elections in general. Technically, there hasn't been anything seriously lacking in our elections for quite some time. 150 million people voted in 2020, and there were only 20 irregularities. That's absolutely stunning. The issue is who is making the decisions, who is doing the counting of the ballots, who is going to certify the results of those ballots. And that is where we're at right now, is who is in charge of handling the aftermath of the voting once all the votes are in and counted, whether it's by machine or by hand or otherwise. We've lost poll workers because they've been threatened, physically threatened with violence from followers of the ex-president. So they've quit. So who's in charge of those polling places in those key states that we have to deal with for national elections? Is it all people who are, again, election deniers or followers of the president, ex-president? Or is it people who are, there to volunteer and to honestly do the job they're supposed to do, or the people who are hired, in fact, to do those jobs? And that frightens me more than anything else does, more than the voting machines and the integrity of them, whether they're hacked or not. That is not, to me, is not bother me as much as the individuals who are in charge of actually handling all of those ballots and the chain of custody from the time that they're cast to the time that they're counted. And then those who are in charge who have to certify those vote counts. Right now, the Supreme Court of the land, as polluted as it is about to decide whether one political party can decide whether somebody wins or loses. All that other stuff is out the door if it goes that way. So the most important thing, as Ty was talking about earlier, is people have to vote, and they have to vote in huge numbers to overwhelm the system in our favor, in terms of making sure that we have people in charge who wouldn't just arbitrarily take away all of our votes. I mean, that's what's happening right now. That's the issue right now. As far as any kind of election integrity, it's who's in charge. Who's making those decisions? Is it somebody who believes in conspiracy theories and QAnon, or is it somebody who's there to do the job honestly and straightforward? That's the question.
I think that's an awesome question too. So I'm going to pose some of this to Bennie, and then I'll circle back around to the other panelists on this, right? So Bennie, one of the things that Tim brought up there was a concern about certain candidates that are running for boards of elections or for secretaries of state, right, who may have partisan leanings themselves. How worried should we generally be about these sorts of individuals getting into these positions of power?
I wouldn't say worried as much as I would say that you should participate. Many of these officials, regardless of their partisan leanings, still have to follow the state law. So as long as the laws are there and people are watching the laws, we all have to police our republic. So the partisan makeups do create problems potentially, but they also create the same number of opportunities. If to Tim's point, if you're overwhelming the system, if you're worried about the capacity to do something that gives an advantage, then what you need is, in Tennessee, I don't even think you can do that necessarily. You have to have a Democrat and a Republican at every polling place to be registrars, to be judges, to sign off on returns, to check the precinct results, to get into the tabulation room. I was privileged to have Miles O'Brien from PBS. He came and followed me for a whole day, and basically they did a blurb on Shelby County, and they followed me as I went through the chain of custody processes of opening the absentee ballots. But it was like I had to unlock a box, and a Republican had to unlock a box so that we could get the keys, so that we could unlock other boxes. So as long, and that's why I said in my first opening, was that as long as the chain of custody is there, I actually think it should be like sheriffs. I think if you're dealing with law enforcement, let's get some people that's under oath, because I'm under oath. So I'm under oath to promote the electoral process. I do worry, as Tim does, that when you deal with citizens who are not taking an oath, that they could give way to those partisan leanings. Putting people under oath seems to have more appeal to me.
Yeah, if I may, I think that if we come to the way it is right now with national elections, I'm not sure if it's going to apply to the state elections. Yes, absolutely overwhelming the vote, the voting booths with people, with our, with voters to make sure that those decisions might be made by the largest group of people in the country, the majority, as it were. But my main concern still is all of that doesn't matter if, in fact, the highest court in the land, with the case before them as we speak, which will be decided on before the 2024 elections, if that court allows them to legally steal the elections, regardless of what the vote count is, regardless of how many Democrats and Republicans were counting the votes, if they can certify the election for the other candidate because they just don't want the other one to have won, that is something that's going to be very, very difficult. The aspect of what we went through before is throwing doubt into the elections. We on the left, or the Democrats as it were, might very well be stuck doing the chanting about fraudulent elections on the next go round because they didn't make any mistakes. They did it a smart way, allowing legislators and the courts to make those decisions for us. Again, I think based on this discussion, I think we have the technical aspects of keeping these elections, secure. I think the roadmap for that is pretty clear. I think that path is a good path. I think it's been reliable and it's going to be even more reliable based on what we've discussed. My issue is the very big overriding problem of not having people in the positions of making those decisions if our courts say they can. That's the issue we have. This is what the ex-president was calling and asking them to do. If the court decides in their favor, they will be able to do it. Simple, they'll just be able to do it. And who is going to challenge them? Who is going to challenge these election officials if they make those decisions? Following the law of the land, nobody in the previous administration, including the ex-president, has followed anybody's law of the land. That's the whole problem. Nobody's following the law of the land and or enforcing the laws of the land. Unless I've been living in a cave, that's not happening.
No, Tim, I see your point, and I agree with you, right? I do think that the bigger problem with regards to election integrity, especially in the near term, is definitely electoral fraud rather than voter fraud, right? Changes to the election system that benefit a certain group or party rather than individual voters doing things that are malicious or non-compliant, right? And I don't think that there's much disagreement amongst our panelists on that fact, right? I think I want to try and ask Lynn about a subset of what you were bringing up there, though, Tim. So one of the things that you were bringing up there, though, was about the fact that the technical aspects are essentially solved or solvable as you see them, right?
Yeah.
Lynn, you've worked on complex problems, including like satellites in orbit, right? From your perspective, do you think we're close enough to like a safe election digitally to call that a solved thing at this point already? Or do you think, or like where would you want more there, I guess?
Yeah, so I think there's this fallacy that technology belongs everywhere and that it's always better for everything. I think some concrete things that we can do would be to use hand-marked paper ballots instead of relying on ballot marking devices for all voters. Some voters who have a disability and they need to use a machine to vote, obviously that we should provide that and that assistance to them. But most people can vote on a hand-marked paper ballot. And so sometimes technology like that isn't the best solution. The thing I would say is that I think that these, like Bennie was saying, the infrastructure is there for some of these systems, but we're not actually utilizing the infrastructure we have in place. For instance, Benny's talking about ballot images and how these systems produce a ballot image and a cast vote record. And in some places like North Carolina, we actually aren't even saving those ballot images and cast vote records. They're saved in temporary RAM, and so they just get deleted. And it doesn't take any more time, and it doesn't take up a whole lot of extra space to save those ballot images. So in some states, they release the ballot images and the cast vote records just as a matter of course to the public. And I think that's the most fabulous way to go, because transparency is really the solution here. I think that the states that aren't saving those ballot images, I believe that they're breaking the federal records retention law that says that we have to save all election records for 22 months for federal elections. So if they're deleting these, then you're really kind of creating this gap in an audit so that elections officials themselves, if something goes wrong, wouldn't be able to solve for that. And I do think that there's also a fallacy that there's bipartisan chain of custody for all the processes everywhere. And that actually isn't true for North Carolina. We don't have full bipartisan chain of custody. And so I think what people, the nitty gritty, what people can do on the ground, because elections are so decentralized and every place is so different, is sort of take concrete steps. Number one, find out in your local voting jurisdiction, what are the laws? Can you get cast vote records and ballot images? Is your jurisdiction saving these? This isn't something that we'd have to, go to great lengths to do. It's literally a checkbox: save all ballot images, save no ballot images, or save write-in images. It's really as simple as that. And we're just not utilizing the technology to provide evidence to people. The people who are very skeptical about elections, they're hearing elections officials saying this was the safest election in history, and they're saying, okay, show us some evidence that that's true. And I don't think that that's actually, I think that's a valid question. I think we should be looking at this election evidence. And I think that people who are skeptical of elections, we can redirect, because I've been doing this on the ground in North Carolina, and Benny's been doing this, and I know Emily's been doing this, is that we work with people, even if they're skeptical about elections, as long as they're forward looking and that they're working on a solution. Because if you give somebody who's skeptical the task of going and getting their poll tapes and trying to make sure that their jurisdictions are saving ballot images, that gives them something concrete and constructive to do, rather than doing something like just complaining and spreading fear among people.
So I think I want to try and appropriate some of your language there to try and answer one of Tim's questions, because I think that it's a good answer, right? I think that what Lynn is arguing here, and what Bennie and Emily have argued in the past, is that by adding transparency, by making things visible, the fraud attempts that you're worried about that might be legitimized by the Supreme Court or whomever else, what their attempts to do, because they'll be under such a microscope, they won't be able to get away with it, kind of thing. Even if it's allowed in some sense, or they think they're pushing for it, if everybody sees that they're doing it, they won't. Does that help mollify your concerns with that one at all?
Was that to me?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I was responding to your question from before.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was curious about, to me, is there a way, and let me just pose that to the people who have sort of an expertise in this, is there a way for, say, for example, I go to vote, I check X amount of boxes, I come out. Right now, there's no way for me to demonstrate, who I voted for actually at the polling station. They just give you a sticker that says you voted. But is there if there was a way to verify who voted for who officially, so that if you had 20,000 people in one county and who voted one way and 18,000 in another way, and there was some kind of shenanigans, some kind of attempted fraud or tossing of the ballots or whatever it might be, that those people could verify, the 25,000 or 20,000 could say, okay, these voters, I have my, my pay stub, if you will, my receipt, if you will, of who I voted for. And that could be used. All those people those could be counted, and you could say, okay, wow, yeah, that's what the real vote count is, opposed to what they're saying the vote count is. That sounds tremendously complicated, especially when you've got populations of 500,000 to 10 million people voting. But I'm just curious as to whether or not that process has ever been considered, or if it's something that could be maybe down the line worked out, where there's a receipt for who you voted for. So if there wasn't the issue, that could be shown, and they could verify whether somebody was dumping ballots or not counting ballots or whatever. I don't know if that's possible or not.
All three of you want to go, but I'm going to go with Bennie first.
Yeah, it's half and half. I'm going to split it down the middle. You can't violate the sanctity of the ballot, so you can't have a receipt. However,
I see.
That's what the ballot image does, right? If you think about filling out a paper ballot, that's what makes the ballot marking device the lesser of the secure methods. When you fill out a paper ballot, a hand-marked paper ballot, the ink density is different. You fill out the circles and the ovals differently. I've been coloring outside the lines my whole life. So and then when you write in, if you do any type of write in, like there is going to be so much. It's almost like a fingerprint. Each ballot is like a fingerprint. Yeah. If you just say, I know that I'm gonna vote for this candidate and I'm gonna write his name too. Nobody can get you to disagree with your own handwriting.
Right.
So if they posted the images online, then you could go and look up your own, and technically you don't violate the sanctity of the ballot when you do so. So a lot of that is there. That's the ballot image project. The problem we have is that piece of transparency is just not happening for us yet. And I'm gonna get out the way because I know these other ladies got something.
Emily, if you would.
Sure, I'll just add to that there is a pilot project going on by one of our partner organizations, Democracy Counts. They're the same folks that do the app for recording the poll tapes. They're developing another app called Wanna Vote, which can be used outside the polling place. So when voters are coming out, they I hope I've got this right. So it's basically kind of like a parallel election. They ask people how they voted and they can record it. This can also be used for if people are turned away at the polls, for them to record, if there's somebody there with the app, to record how they would have voted, so that we can actually measure the impact on the election results of voter suppression. So if people are turned away at the polls, they can say, well, if I'd been able to vote, here's how I would have voted. We can show this candidate lost this many votes because of people being turned away. It's that second piece that I think is the focus of Wanna Vote, but I believe it can also be used in the first way that I described, to kind of give a parallel or second count as a check on the official count.
Mm-hmm.
But, for that to be adopted nationwide is going to take a huge amount of resources.
And Lynn.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of hammer on what Bennie is saying. Casting a vote, filling out your ballot is a separate process than counting your ballot. So those are, a lot of times election officials like to conflate those two, and they say, oh, it's just a big system that kind of encompasses everything. And what Bennie, and I know Emily and pretty much any expert who knows anything about computers will tell you, is that a hand-marked paper ballot is really the best record of voter intent, because when somebody is filling out their hand-marked paper ballot with, a ballot marking device like this, they're really verifying their ballot as they go. And one of the federal regulations is that every voter has to be able to verify their ballot before they cast it. So that hand-marked paper ballot really does that. Now we talk about ballot marking devices, and there are several different kinds, and they're very useful for people who need like a sip and puff or need an audio, for the blind or and visually impaired. And so one of the systems that is on the market and that is used in almost all of North Carolina is this ballot marking device where you make your selections on the screen rather than using a pen. And what comes out of that machine is a ballot summary card. And on the top of the ballot summary card are barcodes. And then there's a sort of human readable below that. And voters are asked to check that human readable part as sort of their verification that their who they're voting for. However, those scanning machines, those tabulators, they only read the barcode. And I joke around and I tell people, I say, I'd rather them put it in Klingon because at least I could translate that. In a barcode, they're using sort of this proprietary barcode where I, as a voter, if unfortunately my county votes on hand-marked paper ballot, but if I lived in one of those other counties, I'd be forced to vote on a system where I can't actually verify my ballot.
Cool. All right,
So
Bob.
if a hand-marked ballot is the most secure way to vote, then the point I'd like to reiterate that vote by mail is an incredibly safe and reliable way to vote. There was such a systematic attack on the integrity of mail-in voting that I would like to just repeat what you said about a handwritten ballot, that makes vote by mail, and especially honest and reliable way to vote. So if we could, but however, we are at the mercy of the fact that the country has lost a certain amount of faith in our postal system. We still have the same man in charge of the postal system who was taking all of the mail processing machines. He was shutting them down at a time when we needed to gear up our capacity. He was reducing our capacity. What is and I don't hear as many people talking about that right now. So if we are going to convince everyone watching that your vote counts and get as many other people as you can to vote, because every vote counts, we also have to deal with that issue, that we still have the same man in charge of the post office, and how reliable will mail-in voting be for both this and the 2024 election if we are not?
If I may, Bob, and adding to what Bob has just brought up again, it comes back to what I said originally about the mail-in ballots. For example, several of the red states have taken away the option of mail-in ballots. They have made mail-in ballots almost impossible in some locations. So people they don't want to put the ballot boxes out. They have refused to do it. That is state legislators that have done that deliberately to suppress the vote in that fashion. So it has nothing to do with anything technological. It has to do with the people making decisions about who can and who cannot vote, which is authoritarian, which is basically what that is. So that situation is really problematic on a very large scale. If you're not able to mail in the ballots because there's no system for that, because they do not want that to happen. They've taken what was essentially a fraudulent accusation and propaganda and turned it into a law, which goes back to what I was saying before, a law that could be passed, that they could follow, that nobody challenges or any court says is wrong. So that one basic process of being able to mail in a ballot, Bob is absolutely right. It's not only the safest, it's the quickest and the easiest to be able to do that at your home and put it in a ballot box instead of standing in line for 10 hours. The universities in Texas, they have not put any polling places where the students are going to college. They took them away. So they have to go to other polling places farther from the campus, which are going to be crowded and wait longer in lines.
In Georgia, closing polling places on Sundays, that discourages the African-American vote there too. Yeah, there's a ton of this out there, right?
Nonsense. It's crazy. I don't know how that, to me, that is what the greatest threat is. We can do anything we want technologically. If I was in charge of the voting systems in a state or county or whatever it came out to be, I could guarantee you it would be secure as the day is long, because my desire is for that. But if the people in charge, their desire is not that, is to do the opposite of that, because of their, political ideologies and fantasies and God knows what, then that's the issue that is at hand right now. And it's going to come down to what Ty said, is we have to really overwhelm the vote. And then someone is going to have to initiate challenges in the courts, and good luck with that, in order to deal with the irregularities that may very well come up. as a result of who's making those decisions. That's really ridiculous that you can't even put a ballot in a mailbox for voting. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, no, you bring up a very good point, right? Like states like Oregon have been using vote by mail for a decade or 2 decades at this point, I think. And you can actually see when they've sent you your ballot on a website. You can see when you've sent it back. You can see when it's been received. And all these things are logged on a website you can look up with your social security number. It's very secure. They've been doing it for a while. So there's definitely ideas that we can take from states like Oregon to do this. But you've just shown us a whole lot of, or you've asked a good question about like, what can we do in these sorts of situations? So I'm going to actually pose like, what can we do to help as our question to the 3 panelists on this bit? Because I think that that's like the broadest way to cover this issue. So I'm going to start with you, Lynn. What are some ways that like individuals, Trekkies like us, can actually help, promote safe, secure, accurate elections?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing, I understand what Tim is saying, and for most of us, we don't have much control over that. We have control over our own area and what we do as individuals. And I would say, yes, the most important thing is to go vote. I mean, that is the most important thing. Even if you're skeptical about elections, you should still go vote. And I think that people really need to understand that things are going to be different everywhere. Mail-in voting in one state is very different than mail-in voting in another state, and how they process those absentee ballots is really important. And so going to your meetings, going to your election jurisdiction meetings that they have, understanding the process, making sure that people are following that process, and then telling everybody when they did follow the process to increase that security. And I think the biggest thing the sort of final message that I would say is make a plan to vote and then make a backup plan to vote. And I'll give you an example. In my state, my plan to vote is going to be on election day in person, because I can fill out a hand-marked paper ballot that way. If I lived in a county that wouldn't allow me to fill out a hand-marked paper ballot in person on election day, I'd probably vote absentee. In North Carolina, we can request an absentee ballot and then change our mind at the last minute and go vote in person, and you're not penalized for that. And so what I would say is go explore your own sector, find out what the rules and regulations are, and then make a plan to vote, make a backup plan to vote based on your circumstances.
And this is certainly something that's going to differ for everybody in the audience, by county, by state, everything, right? You're going to have to figure out some steps on your own, but there are organizations like Scrutineers and others that can help you, guide you in the right direction too. And on that note, Emily, what can we do to help?
So one thing I like to always encourage people to do is to think exponentially. So if you yourself take action, like for example, taking images of poll tapes on election night, that makes a difference. That matters. If you can get 10 other people to do it with you, and you invite them to each invite a few more people, then that makes a lot more difference. So whatever you choose to do, I want to encourage you to think about how could you get more people involved and invite them to get more people involved and keep it rolling, because we really need to grow that quickly between now and 4 weeks from now. There are a variety of ways to get involved that we have available at Scrutineers. We have a training coming up, and I will say the link out loud and also put it into the chat for people who want to do observation of the process that happen after voting ends, the processing and counting of votes, the auditing, etc. We call that training how to help stop election sabotage. You can just go to scrutineers.org and find that on the homepage. We'll also be having a poll tapes training coming up 2 weeks from now, which we will announce to you in the follow-up email from this event, and it will be posted on our site as well. And then again, to sign up to be a poll worker if you can, to encourage everybody around you to vote, to really get educated, and that's a big part of why Scrutineers exists, because as you said when you introduced me, Renzo, I've been involved in this work since 2004, and what I realized is that there are a lot of people who are newly interested, kind of since the Mueller report, in issues of election security, but don't have any way to learn what they need to know in order to be useful volunteers. So Scrutineers has a bunch of different trainings that we offer for our members. We do them live, and then they become part of our membership library, that are things like, what are the different voting systems and how do they work, and what are the vulnerabilities of each one, and how can you be an effective advocate in Congress when there are bills that come up that you care about. Trainings like that people can come and really kind of learn the basics about how to get involved. And then the other thing that I want to say is I always notice, I've been an activist since I was a kid, and I always notice that there's this huge mismatch. There's all these people that say, I really want to make a difference, but I don't know how. And then the people who are out there doing the work don't have enough help. And so what I want to say to anybody here who's thinking, I want to make a difference, but I don't know how, you don't have to know how. All you have to do is find the people who do know how and ask them how you can help. So now now you have us. And so I encourage you to take advantage of us by reaching out to our organizations and getting involved.
And then Bennie, tell us, how can we help?
So I'm gonna run it quick because I want to get to, I think Bob and Tim are onto something with voting by mail. I would say historically, since the 2000s, if you look at history, election integrity has been dominated by most progressive and Democrats. And it has actually hit a tipping point and switched to Republicans. And I think that is it's a dangerous place to be when democracy is basically relegated to the statistics of a coin toss, where every time there's an election, half of the people don't believe the outcome. That's not very good. But everybody wants answers. So that is basically a supply and demand. There's a supply of election returns, and there's a demand for wanting to know what happened. So I would say avoid the rabbit hole if you want to get involved. You have to, I like to sign up at Trek to Vote. I'm gonna plug Trek to Vote. Sign up at Scrutineers, Transparent Elections NC. There's Audit USA, and there's Smart Elections. I'm a technical advisor there, and we do a show once a month where we try to keep people from going down the rabbit hole, because passion is not a substitute for skill. It's just not. And these elections require some skill, and you have a lot of passionate people that don't have anything to do because they don't have any skills that they can apply to making the electorate better. And that's when you end up with these intimidation tactics. And that's what's happened, to Tim's point. It's been kind of knee-jerk, and I think we've gotten into throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to vote by mail, because you have these opposing views about it. And it's probably not as far away as you think. We just need some adults to come into the room. There are a number of configurations that make this voting by mail a desirable method. There are a number of configurations. You can vote by mail, and the problem that Republicans say in Democrat counties, you can just mail it out to everyone. Well, I don't think that's a great idea, because you have these apartment complexes, you have these places where people are not asking to vote. And then you have in Republican areas where they're reacting to this phenomenon that's happening and it doesn't happen in their state at all. So they end up taking the pendulum way too far their way. So in Tennessee, we have some draconian laws here, but we actually have some okay laws. For example, it is illegal for me, Bob. All right, let me put it this way. If I bring you a form to request an absentee ballot, if I just bring you a form that you can fill out and send to the election commission to request an absentee ballot, I've committed a misdemeanor. If you ask me for the form and I bring it to you, I committed a felony. Two acts and two crimes. That's probably too far. Let's go out on a limb and say that's probably too far. But they are trying to make sure that there is a confirmation, which is not a bad idea, that the person that is actually going to participate, they can verify that that person is supposed to participate. So I think if you can master that, it's the list. You could have a slush fund of names where you could just print ballots ad nauseum because you have so many people on the rolls, and you can know that they're not going to participate based on their voting history. And then you can end up just voting a whole bunch of ballots. And that's the knee-jerk reaction that's happening. But if you can master that, then I don't see a problem with me voting early, but I just bring my ballot and just put it in a scanner. Why do I have to stand in line to do that? If I request the ballot to come to me in mail, I can do it in the comfort of my own home. You know, if it's 100 names on the ballot, I can sit down like I'm taking an ACT. I can take as long as I want to, take that ballot in and put it in a scanner. Why do I have to walk into a physical place? So there are a number of configurations that can make that good. I don't think people want it to be good, honestly, but if we had some adults in the room where we can map out and iron out these processes, that would be a very desirable method.
Yeah. It's about who's in charge. It's about who's making the decision, who's running the show.
Absolutely.
Who watches the watchers?
Well, you know, and it's the overall situation is that they are a minority. They are a voting minority in this country. And it's going that headlong in that direction. It's not going to go in reverse. The one political party is losing the numbers game, and they are desperately trying to stop that and to maintain power. And that's what we have. We have never had it happen before. It's never happened since the country was founded until now, which is absolutely unbelievable. And we're living through it right now. This is a crossroads. That group of people, that one political party, that one ideology is a minority, a statistical minority, and they know it. The electoral voting system itself, somebody please explain to me how that's constitutional. Everything from dog catcher up to that point is one person, one vote, and now we have a system still in place that will ignore 8 million votes. 8 million votes not counted at all. Only 3 states and a margin of 100,000 votes determines who runs the entire country. That is right on the knife's edge. That's on a knife's edge, and they know that. And that system in itself, I don't know how long it would take to argue that in front of anybody's court, as it were, a legitimate court. I could do it tomorrow. I could do it in 10 minutes and argue the case myself with no law degree or anything. It's unconstitutional. One person, one vote. That is what the Constitution says. The Constitution doesn't say anything about electoral voting system. That's crap that was put in later. Okay, so that basic system for electing the leader of the country excludes, as Biden won, 8 million votes would have not counted had he lost the election. So that's a whole lot of people that have no say-so in how the country is run. Fundamentally wrong. So that narrow margin of 100,000 votes or less that make a difference between who runs the country, that's where, in 2 states or 3, that's where the issue is. That's the bullseye right now, as far as anybody, election integrity. It's those 3 states for the national election, general election. It's those 3 states. Right there, right now, that's where the target is.
No, I'm right there with you, Tim. I'd gladly be your co-counsel on that one, because I also think the Electoral College is something that needs a good re-inspection in the 21st century. So, right there with you.
Rework.
Definitely. And you're right? Like, you can look at the statistics for this. It takes 1.42 Californians to get 1 vote equal to an Idahoan, just based on the distribution there, because the Electoral College has a fixed number of votes or individuals for it. So it's just a mess. Right there with you. But I have to I promised our audience that we would pivot to some Star Trek stuff. Okay. And we're right at that point now, so we're going to switch to this.
You got it.
So our first question comes from Teresa in Seattle, and it's a question for Tim. Teresa asks, a little birdie told me that you are good at taking disco naps during filming. When did you discover the superpower, and do you have any tips for those of us that are bad at napping? I don't know what a disco nap is, so if you could tell me that too, I'd appreciate it.
What she means is that, and Bob was well aware of that when working on the show. I could, when I came in, we had very early calls sometimes, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I happen to be a night person, so I stay up. So, I'm coming in at 6 and I'm dragging my tail. So during the day, if we're going to work a 12-hour day, sometimes 16 hours, I'm exhausted. So I would just lay down in the trailer and I could close my eyes for 20 minutes and I could get to REM sleep, which is pretty deep, in that 20 minutes time. Now, when you wake up, you feel like you've been run over by a train, but that only lasts about 5 minutes. And then you're good for the next 3 hours. You feel like you've just had an injection of something, adrenaline. It's great. The key is you cannot drink caffeine. You cannot go in there slushing coffee down and expect to get that. So I learned to not drink caffeinated coffee or tea, and be able to just lay down, close my eyes, and get 15 to 20 minutes or more of sleep just to get me back on my feet for the next 3 hours. It works like a charm. I've been using it since Voyager, and Voyager is really when I started to do it. And that's helped me out. So the disco just means it's a very short nap.
Gotcha. No, that's awesome. I wish I had that skill. For me, if I take a nap, my biggest problem with the nap is not the falling asleep and getting up. It's then I can't sleep that night. It'll be 4 a.m. if I took a 2-hour nap in the afternoon and I still can't sleep.
Well, now 2 hours is a long time. That is true. What I'm talking about is very
cat naps.
Important. Cat naps. And in fact, scientists have done the study on sleep studies. And if you were working during the week and you could not make a full night's sleep, you could function for several days without sleeping a full night's sleep, just taking cat naps. You can actually do it. Now, you will reach a wall at some point in time, but you can work for a good period of time just doing cat naps. So, it's effective.
It's called medical school, I think.
It's called medical school, yeah.
I remember one of my fondest memories of Voyager would be to knock on Tim's trailer door, or to see his door open when someone else was speaking to him, and to see him in his robe and slippers during a shooting day.
I used to sleep on the set. I would sleep on the set. I would sleep at my station, put a pillow deck on the floor at my station while they were doing the lighting setup for the next scene, because it saved me time from walking back to my trailer, both ways. I could get an extra 5 minutes of sleep that way. It was always great, man. Perfect. No problem.
Did the ears ever complicate that for you, Tim?
The ears? No, never. Absolutely not. Nope, not a problem.
Awesome. So my next question is to you, Bob. So you've got a bit of a reputation on the internet of being hilarious, right? You've got these alfresco shorts. They get you a lot of attention. They're fantastic. And you do some goofy things, like you show us cooking recipes in your hotel rooms with like a pot of boiling water, right? Are there any times where you've had an experience that you wanted to share, but you couldn't at the time, and you could share with one for us now?
Wow. Well, yeah, probably all the time. But it really came out of the COVID lockdown, because there was suddenly no way to be creative, no one to act with. So I started to act with myself. I started creating different characters, and I would play opposite myself. The Technobabble alfresco that you're referring to is me taking classic pieces of Voyager dialogue, usually from my character, and recreating them in pretty settings around the world. And I just did a bunch of them in Greece and Turkey, I think, because I was away on vacation. And that's been really fun, because it's reminded me, it's brought me back mentally to saying those lines on the set. And shockingly, I can review them for just a few seconds, often a relatively complicated speech, and relearn it. So it's been a fun way to revisit the Voyager experience from a personal perspective. It was a fun way to have something to do during COVID that kept me creative. I don't have I guess if I will share with you that the very next one, which I believe is this coming Friday, I really play a joke on the audience. I will say that. I challenge your expectations that I have set up in previous, and I'll say no more than that.
I look forward to it then.
Mhm.
So I'm going to flip the script slightly. We've been asking a lot of questions of our panelists this entire last hour and 20 minutes. I want to see if the panelists have any questions that they'd like to ask our Star Trek guests, who are also here for entertainment purposes.
Sure.
Unexpected,
I'll go. So I have recently become very much more interested in Star Trek, and my husband and I have been watching a lot of the shows in the past month. And my question is for Tim. You're very passionate in real life, and you're very serious and analytical, obviously, on the set. And so my question is, do you feel like you're a mix of Vulcan and human, or do you feel more one way or the other?
Well, a number of my friends have actually, told me that, that was not much of a stretch to play Tuvok because I had a lot of his attributes. It's true that things that are not logical and things that don't make sense drive me absolutely bananas. More so every single year that goes by. I like things that make sense. I like things that are logical, but things that are thought out, and we have to deal with these things. Everybody does every day, from customer service to God knows what, just things that are, they're just not designed properly, not designed well, not set up properly, not run the way they should be run. So I have been like that as far as what my character goes. What I really do need from Tuvok, though, is I need his patience when I'm in traffic on the 405. I need that. I need that zen sort of whatever it is when I'm trying to get someplace in traffic in LA. But otherwise, yes, there are similarities to myself and that character, absolutely. And in fact, that's kind of the secret with casting for most projects in the film and television business. A lot of time, it's the walk and talk of the person very directly translate to what you see on the screen.
I got a question.
Yes.
What's the best series after Voyager?
The best series after Voyager? I enjoyed working on iCarly, which is a huge break and just literally the opposite side of the spectrum from going from what I was playing as Tuvok to playing this character in a comedy for young people. And it was just a kick in the pants. It was a lot of fun to be able to do that, to be able to run, the scenes all the way through without stopping. And, it was a 4-camera show. It was very cool. So I enjoyed doing that. I was a recurring actor on it for about, 8, 9, 10 episodes or something like that while I was on. So
now I appreciate that answer, but I'm talking about a Trek series.
Yeah.
I'm going for the superlatives.
You want an opinion?
What has been my favorite, as far as what's come on after we've been done?
Yes.
Oh, I think Picard is a little better than than Discovery. That's just my personal preference.
Okay.
I like Picard, and but as far as that's just watching. I mean, obviously I'm not working on those shows, but just looking at them, I think that that would be one of the better ones. And now, of course, the Strange New Worlds is out. I have not had a chance to see it, so I've heard very good things about it.
What about before?
Before, I was raised on more or less on the original series, but as I always say, we grew up in an era, in the era of 3 networks. And a lot of reruns. So I could be just as familiar with Star Trek, the original series, as I could Gilligan's Island or I Love Lucy. I know all of those episodes as well, and The Twilight Zone. So, I was very, very familiar with the original series. And I think the original series, we wouldn't be sitting here now if that series had not caught on and became so popular and so such a cult phenomenon, if it wasn't done so well. And the stories that were told were so good. And that's the secret to our show and the franchise itself, is the storytelling. It's what it's all about.
And Bob, I'm going to hold you to Benny's question there too. Besides Voyager, what's your second favorite Star Trek show?
Well, it was a 2-part question, as I understand. I would say of the between the original series through Enterprise, the show I was most familiar with, other than ours, was Next Gen. So I would have to go. I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of our show and our Captain Kate Mulgrew, but I would have to put Next Gen obviously up there with us. But part of it is also I haven't seen a lot of the others of Deep Space Nine. I know the original series far less well than Tim does, and I've seen some absolutely great episodes, and I've seen some real turkeys too. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I said it. From the new shows, I really like. I've only seen 3 episodes of Strange New Worlds, but I think what everybody said before I watched it is really true so far. That it evokes the original series the most, It's a throwback to self-contained single episode storytelling. Now, our show was very much, we did not do long story arcs. We did a few two-parters, but we were considered more like the original series than, for example, Deep Space Nine, which was contemporaneous with us because they did long story arcs. Now, in retrospect, Deep Space Nine seems like they were ahead of the curve compared to Voyager, because all streaming shows now are told really from the perspective that people are going to, binge watch them, so that season-long arcs at least are de rigueur now. However, I really like Strange New Worlds. I've also really enjoyed Picard, and I probably haven't, I've only seen episodes from the first season and the most recent season of Discovery, but that's also very strong. But I feel that Strange New Worlds is most in keeping with Star Trek's original vision of all of the shows that are on now.
Thank you, Bob. And then last but certainly not least, Emily, did you have a question for either one of the guests?
My question isn't exactly about Star Trek, but is this: seeing the difference in kind of the publicity, the response to the publicity for this event compared to the response to the publicity for other events that we at Scrutineers do. It's very clear that Star Power has a really delightful role in the ability to recruit people to get involved. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how a group like Scrutineers might find celebrities who are interested in our cause and willing to help us draw more people in.
I think that's a very, it's just a matter of tapping those celebrities who are invested in this. There are celebrities like John Cusack, who's absolutely fiercely political and very much in the Democratic arena. And I think it's just a matter of finding people who obviously find a time slot to do it, but who are passionate about what's going on. And a lot of us are. The vast majority of actors, musicians, singers, things like that, the creative folks are looking forward. We are progressive. We tend to be democratic. And
we're a nonpartisan organization, so the democratic part isn't so much what I'm looking for, but we are a progressive organization. So
yes, progressive. Well, yes, and that tends to fall in the democratic side more than others. I mean, because it's about looking forward, not backward. So I think you're going to find a lot of actors and performers and artists who are in that field, more so than not. It just tends to go that way because we are creative.
So suggestions about how to approach them?
That would be anything from most of the time you'd have to go through their management. You might be able to try to reach them through social media, but I would just go through their management and make an offer.
And management, either their agents and often their publicists. Yeah. I'd like to point out that there's a cast revival right now that's going on of the stars of Veep and West Wing that are on, I believe, at exactly this same time. So so there are a lot of people in our industry that feel strongly about this, and I would look to some of them in particular, like Bradley Whitford. But it's funny, I feel like 25 years ago, when the Planetary Society approached me, it's a space advocacy group, and I thought, well, gee, I don't really know what I can do to help, but I'd like to try. I have gotten it's been such an important part of this last 25 years of my life to be an advocate for them and to be a cheerleader for space exploration, to help the science fiction public to realize that if they're science fiction fans, they're really science fans as well, and to have a look at what we're really doing now in space. Tim gets it because Tim, as you said early on, is a very accomplished amateur astronomer. He has done a pitch for people to join the Planetary Society, as have many of my other Star Trek colleagues, Kate Mulgrew, John Delancey, George Takei. And just to support what you just said, Emily, their endorsements, they're talking about the importance of being an advocate for space, talking to your congressman about increased funding for NASA, not letting programs get cut because of a change in administration that are important to you. All of those things, it's important for celebrities to shine a light on it. But it's people like you, Bennie, Lynn, and Emily, who, if we bring people to the table, it's your expertise and your knowledge and the depth of your knowledge. That's the meal. That's what people need to hear. You've been all extraordinary in your answers today, and I've learned a lot listening to you. So, as I said, Tim and I can help ring the bell and get people to supper, but you guys are the meal.
Yeah.
We're cooking. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tim, I got a book for you too by our district attorney. He wrote a book, Rethinking U.S. Election Law. The last point that you were making is Rethinking U.S. Election Law by Steve Mulroy.
Interesting. Okay.
Just want to check out.
Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, does he address the electoral process as well in that book?
He goes in depth.
Wow, very cool, excellent. And Lynn, my hat's off to your work in space. I've been, as Bob mentioned, I've been an amateur astronomer for 35 years. So I worked with the Lucy mission recently before they launched, doing an asteroid occultation with the telescope that I have now. So it was very cool to be able to assist them in assessing the approximate shape and size of one of those asteroids. So it's very cool.
So what telescope do you have? And if you're ever in North Carolina, my husband has a fabulous telescope. His dad bought him when he got his PhD. And we could probably find a decent dark spot. So
that would be great.
What telescope are you using?
Well, I have about 5 or 6 of them. Most of them are optical telescopes, Dobsonians and Schmidt-Cassegrains, Maksudovs. But what I have now is a unistellar EV scope, which is an imaging telescope, which allows me to be able to use it in the city because it can filter the light out. It's GPS operated off your phone. It's off an app, and it's a very small and relatively easy to. It's very portable telescope. Only 2 pieces, the scope and the stand, and I can actually image deep sky objects within 3 or 4 minutes, and they'll be in the eyepiece, often with color. So it's incredible, brand spanking new technology, and I actually represent the telescope for the company. So.
Wow.
It's very cool.
Excellent.
So I have a small request for you, Tim. My dog here, who is currently dealing with a thunderstorm, hence why he's decided to crawl up me. His name is Tuvix because of his pointy ears. So if you could virtually sign my pup on the side here, that would be very appreciated.
That would be great. There you go. Right
Much
on
appreciated.
the side. Yes. The poor thing had the thunderstorms. My goodness.
He's here shivering.
Oh no.
So I think we've come to the end of our session. I've got a couple small things to get out, and we're just going to wrap up. So first, another big thank you to our guests, Tim Russ and Bob Picardo. Another huge thank you to our panelists, Lynn Bernstein, Director Emily Levy, and Bennie Smith. So we've got a great panel there. And a thanks to all the organizations that helped us with this, our partners and groups as well. And remember, to anybody who's listening, if you want to make our elections more successful, make them more representative, remember to vote. Above all else, vote, vote, vote.
Vote,
right?
vote, yes.
And if there's anything else that you want to do and have the time or ability to do more, volunteer. Get in touch with a group like Trek the Vote, get in touch with Scrutineers. We'll help put you somewhere where you can make a difference. And that's what really matters in life, making a difference. That's how we get to a utopian future like Star Trek. So,
yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks also to everyone who showed up today.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters, to S. Tam and Nora Hickson. Thank you so much for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your ears. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.